Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hash, where we bring you the latest and greatest in crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and today on the show, we have Jen Sanasie, Zack, Seward, Will Foxley. No, we do not have, I was about to say Ben Powers, but we have David Morris here, which is wonderful news. And also more wonderful news is we have a very special guest on the show today. So I'm going to kick this straight off to Zack, who's going to introduce our first segment.
That's right. Today we are joined by Congressman Darren Soto of Florida. He is been watching closely the negotiations going on in Congress. We're talking clearly about the infrastructure bill and the crypto tax reporting amendment that was included therein. Thank you for joining us, Congressman. How are you today?
It's my pleasure, Zach. I'm keeping busy. Obviously, we have a lot going on with cryptocurrency provisions in the Senate bipartisan infrastructure package, and have some actions we're about to take in the House to address these issues.
Yeah, lots going on indeed. I definitely want to jump right into this and just talk about these actions. First of all, talk to me about what's your primary objection to the language that the Senate passed and that is now before the House, and talk to me about what actions you're planning to take to potentially change some of that language.
Well, our objection is that the definition may be too broad. Any person who, for consideration, is responsible for regularly providing any service effectuating a transfer of digital assets. You know, that's a mouthful, and it could be overinterpreted. We want to make sure that software developers, crypto miners, node operators, and other non-brokers aren't included. And there was a bipartisan consensus amendment in the Senate. It went down because they weren't taking any new amendments, and that was a sad thing. That's just a political reality for the Senate. So we're going to give it a crack in the House, and we have sort of a three-pronged strategy. I'll be filing a bill to address this compromise amendment. We'll be pushing for an amendment. It's unlikely that they're going to amend the bipartisan infrastructure package, so we really would be looking towards reconciliation or a bill to fast track through as a fix as our main strategies in the House.
Interesting. I'm going to toss this next one to David. David, what's your question of the congressman here?
Yeah, so we're going to lose all of our viewers here because my first question is kind of a boring procedural one. The senators who wrote the original language, I think the broad understanding is that it was just kind of done hastily and poorly crafted, and that the Rob Porter and Mark Warner, the co-sponsors of that measure, have now gone on the congressional record to say that this broader definition was not their intent, that they're not trying to rope in, for example, miners and software developers. And my understanding is that regulators, including the IRS and Treasury, are expected to honor those intentions if this language does go on to become the basis for regulation. But why, to your mind, despite having those assurances in place, is it still important to go to the actual text of the bill and change that through this complicated reconciliation process?
Legislative intent's only persuasive authority. So should agencies or courts ultimately find a conflict between the statutory language and the intent, then they could still interpret broadly either now or in the future. So that's why clarifying language is really important. Look, this is a historic national bipartisan infrastructure package at a time when we desperately need it. It's over 1,000 pages, I think over 2,000 pages. So when you're drafting something like that in the compromises of the Senate, you're going to have some inartful language every now and again, especially because not everybody's exactly a pro or an expert at cryptocurrency and the differences. So, I believe it's important for us to have a strategy in the House to address these issues as best we can.
Thank you.
Just off the back
I think,
No,
Jen,
go for it,
sorry, I was
David.
going to throw it to you. No, you beat me to it.
Oh,
You
okay.
introduced yourself.
Just off the back of what you're saying, Congressman, we've spoken a lot on the show about a lack of education when it comes to regulators and politicians and crypto. And the infrastructure bill was an example of this when we talk about the language. Now, do you think that there's a lack of education? You're a lot closer to this than we are. Or do you think that there are ulterior motives at play?
Sure, I believe ignorance is our greatest foe, not necessarily partisanship on this issue. You saw both Portman and Warner come out in support of a bipartisan compromise. I'll be working with Representative Emmer, Foster, Budd, and Kana, a coalition of Democrats and Republicans ranging from very conservative to very progressive. And we understand this is an innovative industry, and it's one that we want to continue to foster growth in, and for the United States to have fair rules of the road. So to me, it's about educating members of Congress. I will say the one positive silver lining of this whole debate is that it did bring into the forefront a focus on cryptocurrency. Who would have thought in a debate over a national infrastructure project, a huge package, that one of the hot button issues would be cryptocurrency? That in itself had an education effect.
Awesome. Well, I'll jump in with another question if I can. So I'm wondering about the state-by-state way of looking at cryptocurrency itself. Of course, you're in Florida, where we've seen like a lot of enthusiasm around the cryptocurrency space, especially in Miami. And then there's some other states like Texas, and then parts of New York State. Not all parts of New York have had a lot of enthusiasm for cryptocurrency itself. What does it look like for states to be making a cryptocurrency play versus a federal level play, where we see like Congress is making large swath kind of regulations around cryptocurrency, but we also see like states getting involved and they want to attract industry to itself. And there seems to be some conflict. I think that was really captured in Senator Ted Cruz's remarks last week on the Senate floor.
Sure. So as our forefathers created the union and the balance of powers between the federal and state governments, our states are our experimental workshops, both constitutionally and cutting edge legislation, and we sort of get a feel for it. But when we're talking about something like cryptocurrency that is necessarily interstate commerce, eventually it comes to the federal government. So the states play an important trailblazer role in seeing what works, but ultimately something like this needs to have national rules, and not on every little thing, just on the broadest framework that we need. For instance, how we're going to track revenue and payment of taxes on cryptocurrency. That's something that really needs to be national. The states can do that potentially for state income tax, but this is truly a national issue, much like a lot of things like the internet and other types of businesses and commerce. And I serve on that committee, on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where our charge is the Interstate Commerce Clause. So I do think the states play a role, and there may be other roles to play in the future. They're the trailblazers, and ultimately, as we get to best practices by looking at the states, the federal government slowly but surely comes in. But it is important for us to take our time, because when we establish a rule, it's for all 50 states and 5 territories. So it's got to be right. So we're okay with it being a little slower on the federal level.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I have a question. With the initial amendment that was put through, it seems that you have Congressman who wrote the original language of the bill come in favor of it, and then there was a complete 180, and him turning around and putting forward his own amendment. What do you think was the motivation behind that? Seeing as he then went on the record to say that the intent behind this is not to have this broad scope of what the definition of a broker is.
Sure. So this gets to really in the weeds statutory interpretation. When you see something like any person who for consideration is responsible for regularly providing and effectuating transfer of digital assets, that's a mouthful, right? You think, okay, they're talking about brokers, they're talking about exchanges, but any person. And what is consideration? Is a node operator, is a crypto miner getting some consideration? And they didn't use the term custody, which none of these, including software developers, don't have. So when you're talking about at the federal level, where there could be millions, if not billions of dollars in revenue paid over the years, you want to get it as accurate as possible. And if there was specific groups that were intended not to be there, establishing legislative intent through commenting on the record is important, but the real way to do it is to have specific exclusions in the statute or other ways to narrowly tighten the definition. The stakes are high, so you want to get it as accurate as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, but I'm just wondering why Warner and Portman felt they needed to come out with their own amendment when the first one seemed to pretty much encapsulate everything that you just said.
Sure, I think they might have sought additionally input from the White House and other stakeholders. I don't think there's any nefarious purpose in this. Look, this is complicated stuff. You all are pros on cryptocurrency, but Your average member of Congress is not. And by the way, they're dealing with 1,000 other issues. This is just one of them. Now, it was one that came to the top, but they're drafting a national infrastructure package to combat climate change, this establish new roads and bridges and ports, and modernize our electric system and water systems, and establish rural broadband throughout the nation. So this is just one facet. It got some of their attention, but as they got more advocacy towards it, I think they pivoted a little bit, and were probably surprised about the real focus on it when you don't think of cryptocurrency necessarily right away when you think about infrastructure. It's a financial tool, like a stock or a currency or a future or security. So this isn't necessarily the first thing you're really focusing on when you're developing an infrastructure package. But it's just a testament that this is complicated stuff. They want to get it right, and they're listening to stakeholders. And if they have to evolve to make sure, because the stakes are high, we're all willing to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up all these, the multitude of issues, right? And with each issue comes an interest group, and I think we saw a little bit, crypto get its voice in DC. I was really curious from your perspective, from where you sit, does crypto have a strong enough lobbying presence in DC when we're talking about nuance and technical detail, or is that something that is currently lacking on K Street?
Well, I think both in the financial system and in advocacy, cryptocurrency has really arrived over the last year or so. We know it's been developed for years, and we see markets maturing, exchanges maturing. But the fact that this took center stage in what was otherwise a national infrastructure package shows, one, that we are now seeing a more maturing industry, and we need rules of the road, but not ones that are going to stifle innovation. And it also shows that whether it was paid advocacy or through grassroots or a combination of both, clearly the voice of cryptocurrency was heard on Capitol Hill. And so, but those efforts need to be maintained, right? You don't just have a one-off win and then everything's back to normal. This is now a huge industry, and it will need a steady voice from both the grassroots and from folks on Capitol Hill as well for years to come. Any of the other types of financial tools and technologies I mentioned, they all have a steady presence too, and so the fact that you saw some movement shows a real robust advocacy on this issue.
Yeah, I want to take us away from the bill for just a second. I know you've worked really closely with Congressman Emmer, and he's been vocal on CBDCs leading us down a slippery slope into a surveillance state. I'm wondering what your opinion is on CBDCs and what you see as the future for them in the U.S.
Look, we have to balance between both protecting consumers and making sure that we have folks pay the taxes they owe, and also have freedom to innovate. And so you're going to see, as this industry matures, there'll be constantly reassessments about what rules of the road need to be on the books for protecting consumers while also innovating. And this is something, again, like I mentioned with the other issues, it'll be advocated, and you need a maintenance of effort over the years to make sure we get that right fit. I passed the first two blockchain-related bills out of the House again just a few weeks ago, Blockchain Innovation Act and the Digital Taxonomy Act, both really starting the conversation going on the federal level for this balance between consumer protection, innovation in the regulatory space. One asked the FTC to comment on these issues, and the other asked the Department of Commerce. We hope our Senate colleagues will also do that. We're also working on a blockchain center of excellence in the Department of Commerce to address all applications of blockchain, including cryptocurrency. So I do think as the industry matures, there will be additional rules of the road for consumer protections, but those have to be steady with the growth and eminence of it. But we're talking about an industry that is could be 10% of global GDP over the next 3-4 years, according to the World Financial Forum, among others. So this is becoming a big part of the financial pie. And so therefore, as the industry matures, there'll be ways we'll look at to protect consumers, but that balance needs to be struck. And that's where we'll be constantly listening to everybody.
Congressman Soto, you've been a proponent of crypto really since day one, and you're a Democrat, and then you have Republicans who are also proponents of crypto. So we're seeing this phenomenon where both sides of the aisle are finding something in this technology that will help further their cause. Are you concerned that this is going to eventually become a partisan issue, and how do we avoid that?
I'm not particularly concerned about it as of right now. The blockchain caucus has many Democrats and Republicans. We have major Democratic leaders like Ro Khanna out of Silicon Valley and Bill Foster out of Illinois, who is literally a engineer and really thinks about these things from a technological point of view. In addition to Emmer, Bud, Schweiker out of the Republican side, and before that, now Governor Jared Polis was a big leader in the crypto space when he was in the Congress. So, to me, the bigger issue is ignorance is our big foe. Just making sure whether we're talking about social media, whether we're talking about cryptocurrency, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence, renewable energy, all these cutting edge areas that the United States is going to have to continue to dominate commercial space. I'm from the Central Florida area. We have the busiest spaceport in the world at Cape Canaveral. All these different things. The bigger issue, I don't think, is partisanship as much as educating members who may not specialize in tech type fields in the policy arena.
So, Representative Soto, I've been given the honor of asking the last question, and I'm going to make it a tough one. A lot of this is about kind of misunderstanding and education, but I think there is one real tricky wicket here, which is DeFi or decentralized finance. And those are essentially tools that make it possible to trade financial assets peer-to-peer. And they're not maintained by any company. And so I'm curious if you have any, and we're way ahead of the curve here, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how we might eventually get to some kind of rational regulatory regime for decentralized finance.
Well, first, it's about consensus. We work with both folks in the industry, from our constituents, from folks in the agencies, and with something like this, decentralized financing is fine. We've seen it before in other forms, like Kickstarter on a much smaller space. This would be a national one, or Indiegogo, among others. And now we're seeing the ability for these networks, these exchanges, to be able to do these things. So I think the key is there'll still be an expectation that, look, where there's a tax liability, these transactions need to be reported and taxes need to be paid. And we also need to make sure we're not financing anything illicit. The beauty of cryptocurrency is the record's permanent. And so it really does help long term to be able to combat illicit issues that could come up. And that's the same for currencies. That's the same for bonds or any other industry, even deposits in a bank account. So, but this is one of the signs of a maturing industry. As it becomes more preeminent, there'll be other rules of the road that other more mature areas of the financial sector have certain rules to do two things: make sure people are paying their taxes, and two, making sure that we're not utilizing it for nefarious purposes. And that could be done with any financial tool. There's nothing about cryptocurrency any more than that. And one last thing we're looking at is, you see the ransomware attacks. And sadly, it's something I've had to educate a lot of members of Congress on, because a lot of these ransomware attacks are using the cryptocurrency space to get paid. And so that's an area that you have a lot of members concerned about, especially after the Colonial Pipeline incident. And so there's going to be some concern that we have to address, but we do it by consensus. And so your continued input is really important.
All right, well, we're going to leave it there for today. Congressman Darren Soto, thanks so much for your time. Let's do it again soon, shall we?
Sounds great. Appreciate all of you at CoinDesk and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks again. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we are going to do a quick recap of the largest hack in DeFi history. This Poly Network thing just keeps getting stranger. Stick with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll look into that on the other side. Thanks so much. Bye.
CoinDesk Indexes, the market standard for crypto assets since 2014. The CoinDesk DeFi Index is our latest product and provides insight and exposure into decentralized finance. Our indexes are key for investors looking to access and understand crypto markets.
The CoinDesk DeFi Index is the best tool for a diversified approach to this compelling new category of digital assets.
The CoinDesk DeFi Index, measuring the investable DeFi market.
And welcome back to the Hash. So we're going to dive right into Poly Network and the hack that just keeps on giving entertainment. So earlier this week, it was found out that Poly Network, which is a multi-chain solution for decentralized finance, was hacked to the tune of $610 million, which put it up there not only as only one of the greatest cryptocurrency hacks ever, but also one of the greatest bank heists in world history. But the hacker was found out. Some of their personal information was kind of leaked to different teams out there. And then the Poly Network team also realized that this hacker had nowhere to place the $610 million that they had stolen. And so during the entire week, we had a really fun game of cat and mouse on chain where the hacker would send messages to the Poly Network team and say, hey, maybe I could take some of the funds and give you some other funds back. And then there was talks about him swapping the network out in a hard fork and then using the funds that he stole to start his own network and seeing if he could attract users and keeping those funds alive. He also tried to move some funds into different projects and try to leak them out. End of the day, can't really do much with it. And so he decided to give back almost the entirety of the funds, I think basically all of the funds at this point. And then he was awarded a $500,000 bug bounty for his decision to return those funds, which doesn't really look like a bug bounty to me. So, of course, we talked about white hat and black hat hackers the other day on the show. The difference being black hat hackers hack for the money, white hat hackers hack to provide efficacy in this space. But they decided to give him money anyways. Zach, I want to throw this to you. Really fun story compared to other cryptocurrency stories or DeFi exploits in general. It's like a good ending, but also really, really strange. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, and it really did sort of captivate the imaginations of the mainstream. We saw a lot of mainstream coverage of this hack over the last few days. This idea that you could steal 600 million and not do anything with it, you have to give it back. It's kind of an odd conclusion. It really speaks to, I think, maybe the robustness of these crypto systems, right? You know, here's a bug. It was a major heist. And what are you going to do with that money? I mean, it's all trackable, it's all traceable, and he wasn't doing a good enough job erasing his footprints as he was fleeing the scene, and now he's being recast as a white hat hacker who shall be rewarded with a bug bounty. So a lot of weird things at play, a lot of unexpected elements at play, and I think it caused a lot of people outside the space to take a look and say, hey, what's going on with this big $600 million heist? That's crazy. So just the fact that this sort of captivated everyone from the BBC to NPR to New York Times speaks to, I think, the interest in this space, and still sort of the fact that there's a lot of novel things in the world of DeFi that the world is kind of waking up to. So that to me was the interesting thing to see, but there's so much to go on. There's just so much here. So I'm going to toss it to David and see what his thoughts are. I think David, are you preparing a piece on this? Because I would love to read it.
I've actually, unfortunately, been working on other stuff all week related to flagged 50th anniversary of the end of Bretton Woods this weekend. But on this polyhack, the thing that's interesting to me, and it sounds like maybe you guys hit on it this week in the discussion of white versus black hat, but I'm not sure. I feel like with crypto, what's interesting is that and we're seeing it right now, that white hat versus black hat distinction breaks down to some extent because there's always a bug bounty, right? The chain is the bug bounty. And if you can break it, maybe you get a reward. And the intent, I think, maybe matters a little bit less than if you're an actual white hat trying to get into, say, I don't know, Salesforce or something, and they have a published bug bounty, and maybe you're working in like a pre-production environment or something like that. So Dan Kuhn, our opinion writer yesterday, had a good piece pointing out that each of these attacks, as they happen along the way of the evolution of crypto, strengthens the systems. And Zach, I take your point that the fact that it got rolled back or returned, that there's some strength that's already there, but people are now going to repair the flaw that made this hack possible. They've repaired the flaws that have made previous hacks possible. So every hack, like, it's just getting fixed a little bit more and making things safer for the future. So I think that's really an important thing to think about here.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say how great it is that we can set up systems with the right incentives that can curtail behavior without having to, bring in law enforcement or whatever. Like, you just need the right incentives in the system and people behave in a good way. Like, this person offered $500K and decides to take him up on this offer. There are also, things at play with the decentralized finance system where he just couldn't offload this money. We're presuming that's why he decided to take this other thing. But also, this is going to incentivize more people down the road to look for bugs and potentially get a reward. As long as there's no incentive for people to put this money in DeFi because maybe they'll be blacklisted or maybe it's difficult or whatever, and you have this monetary system helping them find bugs. It's just it's a really nice voluntary system there. I kind of enjoyed watching this play out. It could have gone in a completely different direction, and it's really up in the air whether it would have gone that direction. It's all game theory, but very interested to see how this played out. But Zack, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I mean, there were some carrots at play, but there was also the threat of a pretty big stick. I think some reporting indicated that, had he not turned white hat, the cops would have been called, and that negative, that disincentive from the off-chain world would have been brought into play. So it's interesting to see how those two things interact. But I'm going to kick it to Will for the last word before we jump.
Yeah, really quick. I'm just surprised by Naomi's comment because I think part of this whole story is that decentralized finance isn't truly decentralized in a sense. And the fact that you also can't offload your cryptocurrency as easily as one may want it to be. If it's truly supposed to be digital cash in some sort of sense, then this experiment shows that it really isn't. But maybe we can pick that up again tomorrow or another day because I do want to hear Naomi's thoughts more generally, not just throw a barb over to her. But I think we got another story talking about Binance.
Terribly painful. All right, we'll change track there. But yeah, definitely an interesting topic to dive into about people voluntarily choosing to use a network in a particular way or not. But I want to move over to South Korea and see what's going on with Binance there. So we've reported on the show previously that recently South Korea is among this long list of countries whose financial watchdogs have issued warnings to Binance saying you are not permitted in our jurisdiction. You do not have the right licenses to operate. And so they have just announced that they will discontinue trading pairs and payment options that use the South Korean won effective immediately. They're also including a discontinuation of P2P merchant applications and Korean language support. So they're really shutting down there. It's very interesting to see this Binance story play out, considering that they really haven't had a jurisdiction. It was just we're a thing that's not really based anywhere and anyone in the world can, access us. And then now governments are coming down hard and saying, no, the people here are not allowed. We are putting up a wall that says you cannot access these global tools out there, which is sad for the people in those countries. Obviously, the governments say that it's for the protection of those people. We can debate that all day long. But I want to throw this to the group. Jen, I saw your hand go up. What are your thoughts about the future of Binance, the future of regulation around crypto in general?
Well, first, I just want clarity on something. I thought I read that they weren't asked to leave. They are choosing to pull out of South Korea. So I think that the South Korea, choosing to pull out. So South Korea has asked exchanges to register with regulators by, I think, September 24th. They are choosing to leave. I think over the past month or so, it's like a downward roller coaster for Binance. I don't know what's going to happen next. I wonder what their strategy is behind the scenes. We have yet to see that new CEO be put into place with more of a legal or regulatory background. And so I would just love to be a fly on the wall in their strategy meetings. I have no idea what's going to happen next. David, I see you nodding and shaking your head. So I don't know what's going on there. What are your thoughts on
down and
on
to
what's
the left
happening
on
next?
this one? I'm the only strategy that I can see is they're trying to minimize the number of people who wind up going to jail. They seem to be just really retreating so quickly on so many fronts, and I don't see how they consolidate and then get back to where they would like to be. Maybe they'll have some regulatory pathways in the countries that they're pulling out of. And I guess maybe that really is the thing. They're going to pull out and then go back once there's some clarity. But I mostly think that they're panicking because there's so much regulatory scrutiny coming down, and they've seen what happened to the BitMEX executive team, for example, and they're trying to avoid that fate. Naomi, I saw you.
And just on Jen's point, the regulatory landscape in South Korea is really, really muddy. It's actually not quite clear what's legal and what's not, so it makes sense that they're pulling out. And on top of that, it doesn't seem that it's worth the risk. So last year, they actually announced that they were going to, in the future, be closing the South Korean affiliate because of low usage, low volume. And so now it seems like, well, now we've got regulatory scrutiny. Let's shut this entire thing down. So it makes sense that they're doing that. And, in terms of like consolidating around, I think we're running out of time. That's a whole nother point. So Zach, I'm just going to throw it to you.
Oh, I wanted to hear the other point. Tell us. What was it?
Well, it's the idea that, Binance, the idea that they're retreating and they're very scared. Maybe everyone's got to go to jail. Like, I don't quite buy that scenario, although we have seen what happened with BitMEX, right? But I do see a scenario where they are going to be setting up licensed affiliates everywhere in specific jurisdictions. But you probably will have this kind of ephemeral Binance umbrella company that doesn't have that specific jurisdiction that probably will still be available. And let's be honest, as long as VPNs exist, will probably still be used. And governments are going to have a real hard time cracking down on that. Maybe they can go after the CEOs and all of this. That may be the play that's on the cards. I hope not. But it's just getting harder and harder for governments to put this walled garden around their jurisdiction when it comes to usage on the internet.
All right. Well, I think my hot take was that Shapeshift is the bellwether. Everyone's just going to decentralize to these DeFi chains to stay one step ahead of the crypto cops. And then in 4 years' time, there'll be new frameworks to crack down on that move. That's my bet. Right. I'm sticking to it. All right. That's it for the show. We had a fun show today. We had a congressman on the show. We talked about the Poly Network. We talked about Binance. Man, that was a hot Friday show. That's good stuff. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. We're really over time. And we thank you for sticking with us this week. As always, I'm Zack Seward. We got Naomi Brockwell. We got Will Foxley. We got Jen Sanasie. We got David Morris. We are The Hash. We will be back on Monday, and we can't wait. Talk to you soon, and thanks for watching, as always. Bye.
Thanks, sir.